Good morning and welcome back to the VIP seat. Today is July 15th. Your co-hosts, as usual, are Jesse Neor and Preston Holland. Welcome back to the show. Preston, how's your week been?
Jesse, it's been crazy. Bonus depreciation has made the transaction market on fire. So I am glad that you had to push back our recording time by an hour because it gave me a little bit of time to get prepped for the show and get a few things done. So
Yep. As much as we thought that there wasn't going to be a lot of news happening because it's summer, endless news is happening. We've got tariffs, we've got bonus depreciation, we have some drama on LinkedIn. So this will be a great episode today.
that's why you come here, listener, because we bring you all the drama from social media. So let's jump right in. The top story is a doozy.
Yes. So this literally made headlines last week. The Wall Street Journal is reporting on the WhatsApp groups that are out there where people are selling seats with each other. And this is bringing up all sorts of things from the past. We all remember the Blackbirds, the JetSmarter incidents, all the flight sharing, democratization of private aviation is now occurring, but with individuals. So it's kind of a little different, but people are going on these WhatsApp chats, sharing their availability and pricing and seats, which I believe is highly illegal. But I don't know, Preston, what are you hearing out there?
These groups have existed for a while. I had heard about them originally last year. Somebody had reached out and asked me what I thought about them. And I said, let me do a little bit of digging. And I started reading. I mean, look, I get the concept. The concept totally makes sense. I don't see anybody who would say, no, I don't want that, right? Like everybody says, oh, that sounds great. That sounds excellent. I have had more people tell me they miss JetSmarter than any other application or service that has ever been around in private aviation. So people love this concept. And there's been a lot of people that have tried to hack it and figure it out. But it gets into what we would call the gray area of charter, 134 and a half for those that are in the industry. It is not quite charter, but it's almost there.
Yeah, and it starts to get really complex. Private jet card comparisons, they did a deep dive yesterday. I did a deep dive at Private Aviation Safety Alliance, kind of trying to explain to people, what's legal, what's not legal, what are the risks. I'll give people in a nutshell. Basically, cost sharing is permitted. If you own a private jet and it's not for 135 charter, the pilot and his friends or her friends can share the cost of a flight under Part 91. That's totally fine. Problem starts to come in when it's commercial carriage. When someone's selling you something, there should be responsibilities for refunds, delays, cancellations, safety issues, disclosures. Like there's all this stuff that gets involved. And it's not only the platform that you have to be concerned about. So it's not only like the person who's administrating the JetSmarter app or who's the head of the WhatsApp group, also the passenger that's actually selling that seat. They now start to get into legal issues because they're selling a commercial aviation product to another passenger. So it just starts to unravel a whole bunch of risk that I don't think people realize they're getting into when they're trying to save like $2,000 on their flight to Florida next week. So my advice, do your research and probably just stay away. Maybe in some limited cases it is allowed. There is some DOT like carve outs for self aggregation, but it's very, very tricky. And the DOT actually, they'll rule in each case individually. It's not like a straightforward thing at all.
Yeah, I think so. I've talked to a couple of people who have actually used the service and or who have bought seats and sold seats on these WhatsApp groups for purpose of anonymity and avoiding any sort of inquiries. I will let them remain nameless. But the thing is that people genuinely like this service. I talked to somebody and they said, yeah, I was sitting next to a person who was the lead passenger on the flight. And he asked, hey, they didn't know each other. They were kind of brought together via one of these groups. And they said, well, how much are you paying for your seat? Just asking a question. And they winked at him and said, I'm flying for free. And so, they had aggregated out all of their costs across the other seats and provided a service to the other people who were able to take the flight for a lot cheaper. So the problem I think here is that the FAA does not have a clear guideline and a clear regulation around this concept. I think a few suggestions. Now, this is not legal advice. This is not tax advice. This is all of the not advices. This is one dude's opinion, and I actually have really very small grounding to have this opinion. But here's my opinion. The FAA needs to create some sort of a framework for brokers or for operators to do this, because the problem is that this exists in the market and the market is demanding this. And here's kind of my hot take. The market wants this. This is happening. Whether the FAA is okay with it or not, it is happening and it's going to continue to happen. I think Doug Golan actually pointed out that this has been happening for a really long time. This is not a new concept. It's something that's being created inside of these groups and inside of these apps. I think that the FAA needs to come out with a framework and say, look, here's the deal. We know this is going to happen. We're going to bust the people that are doing this illegally. Don't do things that are unsafe. But you can't just say, don't do this, and then don't have any other option that says, but if you're going to do this, here's how we expect for you to act. I think that the FAA needs to come out with a framework because obviously this is happening. It's made it to the Wall Street Journal. Like, this is stuff that you have to create a framework for, or else it's going to continue to happen. You may infiltrate the WhatsApp group and you may blow things up in there, but then it's going to go to Signal or it's going to go to whatever, right? There has to be a framework that's created for this concept, or else it's going to continue to happen. That's my hot take. That's my opinion. Take that or leave it.
No, I think that's fair. The problem is the FAA moves slow, and some of this is DOT as well. So it's like not only the DOT and the FAA have to get together on this and figure out, okay, how do we actually do this and protect consumers in the process? I think there should be some pretty easy ways to do it. Wheels Up had a version where they were running it through their Part 380 DOT authorization. They were allowing their members to self-aggregate. They're not doing that anymore. So I don't know if they decided it was also a gray area that really couldn't plan or not. Don't quote me on that. I'm just guessing as to why they abandoned the program. But I would think there's got to be some path for 380 that can give consumers the disclosures they need, can ensure you're not, on an illegal charter. Because just because someone's selling a seat, you don't even know if that's a chartered, certificate or aircraft that's even allowed to do commercial carriage. But, for anyone out there selling their seats, just keep in mind, you may face insurance claims if there's an accident. You may get sued to death because you are a wealthy person. And if you sold a seat for a couple $1,000, you may not realize how much risk you're actually putting yourself in by doing this. But no, I agree. I think there should be an option. Aviation moves slow, and we haven't yet gotten to the point where we figured out how to do the Uber of the skies because it's a complicated area.
I also think, here's my other kind of hot take. I've got a lot of opinions on this, and it's one person's opinion. I think one of the main challenges is, so a Wheels Up, for instance, or an ExoJet or a JetSmarter, the problem is that they only control a very small segment of the market. So you have Doug Golan. If you haven't read Doug's deep dive, it is fantastically put together. Jesse gets quoted in there to give a little shout out, but it is incredibly thoughtful in how it kind of progresses here is what's legal currently and here's what's illegal currently. What's the difference? How do you kind of overcome that? One of the things that he points out is that even the top 10 providers only control 20% of the market, and I think it's the top 30 providers only control 30% of the market. So your big problem is that it's a very disparate market. So you have tech guys, you have people that used to work for Uber, or people that used to work for SpaceX or whoever, say, oh, this is a technology problem and this is a go-to-market problem. And we think that we can solve all of this. Yes, I agree. There is a go-to-market problem. The real issue is that there's a framework problem with the FAA that has yet to be solved for you to operate within. Now, you think that you can be Uber and push the limit and just break the rules, and then all of a sudden you can get so much traction that you can bend the rules to your will. If you don't know the history behind Uber, really interesting story to study, because they just totally broke every rule in every city that they went into, said, well, all of your constituents want this, so therefore you need to pass this legally. That's not going to be the case here in private aviation, because the FAA is you're not dealing with the taxi cab union in New York. You're dealing with the FAA. They govern the skies across the board, period, no questions asked. My suggestion to the FAA, if anybody's listening, my suggestion would be create a framework for brokers to successfully perform Part 380 flights. The transaction has to run through the broker, because I think the really big problem comes when Jesse's going from Miami to New York and she says, hey, anybody want to take this seat, buy this seat from you, Jesse the person. So Preston the person buys from Jesse the person, and all of a sudden that transaction throws all of the red flags. It's not Preston calling Jesse, hey, I need to go to New York at some point in the next couple of days. Do you need to go too? And you say yes. And we say, well, you just want to split the cost. Like that, from my understanding, not legal advice, but especially from Doug's column, is okay according to the current framework. Where it becomes very gray is when you start advertising. That's where you have to have the Part 380. That's how
Holding
JSX
out.
exists. That's how Aero
Yeah.
exists.
Yeah, that's
Holding out.
specific.
That's
The
exactly right.
holding out is the tricky legal part.
Yeah. So if the FAA were to create, I think the easiest path to success here, in my opinion, is for the FAA to create framework around Part 380 that allows for more people than just JSX, the monster, to create a program in which the broker acts as the intermediary. They also act in a 380 capacity because 380 was created for travel agents to sell seats on large airliners. If you don't know the history behind Part 380, that is like kind of what the whole roots came from, was Vegas trips from tertiary cities that were going to sell by the seat. And they had some really great areas around 121 and 135. And how does that work? Create a framework that says, broker, if you want to do this, that's fine, but here's the legal framework in which you can do it. And then you can successfully do this. Or else the FAA is going to spend 10 times as much resources trying to go after these individuals, trying to get them. It's going to really hurt for those that get caught, but there's going to be 70% of people that don't get caught. It's going to continue to happen. That's my opinion.
Yeah, no, fair point. I think, the only like little wrinkle that I would throw in there, just because I'm like the safety regulatory girl, more focused, is that I think this is what people fail to understand about Part 135 and the importance of vetting operators and understanding what you're getting into. The reason you can go and buy a seat on a 121 carrier is because they meet 121 airline standards, which is the highest level of regulatory hurdle that you can overcome. And that does not mean that 135 is not just as safe. They are not required in the same way from a regulatory perspective to meet the same standards. They are not overseen at the same level that the airlines are. So I think that's been the rub between, okay, how much do we let passengers who really should be doing their own due diligence on every single charter that they take, because it's not the same as airlines, versus how much do we let them self-aggregate and they feel like they're just getting on an air carrier. So that's the complicated part. But I agree, like it's enough, we've been doing the whack-a-mole thing now for like the last 15 years in this industry. Let's just go ahead and get some sort of regulatory framework so that we can do it the right way.
Yeah, exactly. The market is demanding this. My ex DMs are full of buy the seat requests. And I'm like, I can't help you. That's not what I do, first of all. But second of all, like it's not legal. And even if I did, like, I'm not going to be the gray area person. Like, it's just create black and white standards and then hold people to them, is my opinion. This currently lives in the gray zone. Like, the whole, like, truth in leasing is another great example of like there's gray area because we haven't clearly defined everything that happens with dry leasing. It's more defined, I think, than this, but create clear delineations. It's happening. It got to the Wall Street Journal. Like, I don't know whose pet project this should be, but I would say come up with a framework so that it can happen, or come straight out and say, this cannot happen. And we're even closing the door on the gray zone, right? Like it's going to be more strict than it is. But I think living in this kind of in between is really where people start to get in trouble.
Yeah, for sure. So this is a great segue to our Mile High Madness segment today, because I had to bring up this oldie but goldie from JetSmarter. So let me play this for those who have not seen this
This is
beautiful
going to be
video.
good.
He even allegedly threatened to kill the other passengers.
Heads will be chopped off! Heads will be chopped off!
The video, obtained by CNBC, was shot on board a 12-passenger Gulfstream jet
I think
like
you've seen
this.
enough. Did you see this back in the day?
That's amazing. No. Why?
You
How
haven't
did I
seen that
miss
video?
This is fantastic. Oh my
That was
goodness.
a JetSmarter passenger from years ago. So that kind of was like a press, at that video made national news. The guy obviously was, mentally ill, non-meds. I don't know what was going on. But so he was one of the shared seat passengers that JetSmarter was flying, and that got the industry all in a ruffle a few years ago. So, oh man, that's a classic, Preston. You got to watch the whole thing.
Oh, that's so good. We'll link it in the newsletter. Here's a great time to plug the newsletter. We're going to link that video. Be sure to watch it. If you haven't subscribed, go to thevipseat.com to subscribe. So for those people that don't know, Jesse and I did not share our social media of the day this time, and they hilariously overlap in totally different ways. So welcome to the VIP seat, where we have coincidences all of the time. This is Tiffany Gomez, vacation mode on. with the picture in front of a Gulfstream window. If you don't know who that is, she was the girl who freaked out on the American Airlines flight, got kicked off because she was just having an absolutely bad day and got kicked off an American Airlines flight, freaking not the one. There was like a crazy one recently. This was like one time before that. But she posted this flying on what is very clearly a Gulfstream window. Dead giveaway, circle window, vacay mode on with her passport. So I don't know if she's on a do not fly list or anything, but she apparently did not want to fly American Airlines for this vacation. And yeah, that's glorious that we kind of had our social media clips of the day rhyme.
I mean, I'd be in a much better mood on a Gulfstream with some bubbly rosé, so I can't blame her.
Yeah, no, same here. I mean, I would be in the same boat especially if I wasn't allowed back on a commercial airline of a certain brand. So yeah, that's funny. It's both people freaking out on different types of Gulfstreams.
You may have unlocked something here. That might be a perfect excuse for why, I can only fly private. I just need to act out on a plane and get myself kicked off of like commercial carriers, and then maybe I could go fly private. I will behave, I promise.
That's an expensive freak out there, Jesse.
Yeah, I guess it is. That's not really going to work, is it? Oh, well, speaking of expensive things happening, we've got tariffs coming again.
Tariffs are going to pay for our country. We are not going to have to pay any more taxes. We're going to have everybody else pay our taxes. Here we are, yet again, more tariff news. There has been a increase in tariffs on, there's been a lot of talk around Canada. There has been talk around Brazil. There has been talk about a lot of countries that directly affect business aviation. Germany, for instance, is where Rolls-Royce engines are made. So there's a lot going on, and the components that go into those aircraft are also getting taxed. So it's kind of a mess out there.
Yeah, aluminium, as the Brits like to say, and I wish I could say without sounding weird, and it didn't sound weird, didn't it? That one's getting taxed quite a bit already, which makes up a lot of our components. But obviously now we're looking at Canada getting a 25% tariff. Hard to say if that will actually impact the Bombardiers, the CAEs. I think it would definitely impact Pratt & Whitney. So the USMCA agreement, which replaced NAFTA, I had to do a little bit of a deep dive today because I wanted to understand it better. I still don't understand it after reading it for an hour completely. But
I know M stands for Mexico, C stands for Canada. That's about it.
There we go. But there's a certain amount of like the products that can be made in other areas as long as there's a certain amount of materials or finishing that happens in the United States. I think Bombardier and CAE, for the most part, all their products are USCA approved. Pratt & Whitney, not so much, but I don't know. You gave me some other information today that says that maybe that won't be exempt from these.
Yeah, so I went asking for Grok. If you use Grok, they tend to have, I use different models for different reasons. Grok tends to be a little bit more on the front edge of like breaking news. It said that basically the tariffs currently do not affect Bombardier or exports from Textron and Gulfstream into Canada. But the big ripple effect that there is the parts and maintenance, kind of a lot of the stuff that kind of goes through between the two, steel, aluminum, things like that. And then there's a whole lot of questions around what qualifies and what doesn't when you're trying to pass across the border. So there's parts that may or may not be taxed. No one's really 100% sure. I know Bombardier was probably going to eat it if it came up for a short period of time, but Daher was not eating it. So, from France. So it just kind of depends on the manufacturer and what their stance is on paying for the tariffs. Sorry, Daher was covering a part, but not all. They were passing some on to the dealers, some on to the end consumers. And so it just really depends. But President Trump, July 10th, 11th, said 35% effective August 1st. And we're waiting on Canada to figure out how they're going to respond. But it's not great.
It's not great. And I think, the bigger one too, especially as a former Phenom 300 operator, Brazil is going to be a problem. So he's talking about slapping 50% tariffs on Brazil. And this is not about the United States making money. This is a pure geopolitical play. He's not happy with their relationship with China and Russia. Brazil's been trying to do the, we're friends with everybody thing. But in today's world, when we have global conflict and wars, Trump's kind of not having that right now. So they're going to have to start picking a side, I think, for trading partners. And I don't know what's going to happen to business aviation.
So the one silver lining is that the business jets are finished in Florida, Melbourne, and Embraer has recently expanded their facility down there, which is positive for them. Good foresight. I think that I think it's a 50% tariff from Brazil. And so from the commercial industry, I know that is going to be really tough. I think that we're going to have to wait and see how it actually shakes out. I've talked to a lot of attorney friends, and they say basically I have a really strong opinion today and that is probably irrelevant tomorrow. And so that's part of the problem, is like you just have no clue.
Yeah. Well, I mean, despite that, we release this on Tuesday mornings, but we record this on Mondays. Bombardier's stock price continued to go up today. So I think investors at least are confident on that side. It will be interesting. I think Brazil is the tougher one, and also the materials cost of these parts and things coming from Europe. I mean, the aviation supply chain is so interconnected. No doubt maintenance costs are going up in some way. We haven't seen it that much yet because I think everyone was kind of like, well, we'll take it for now and then we'll see what happens in a couple months. But I don't know how this Brazil thing is going to shake out. I think that one's a little more complicated.
Big downstream issue is us exporting into Brazil. Brazil is a huge maturing market when it comes to business aviation. They actually have recently released, I think I've talked about this in the podcast before, but they have recently instituted where if you understand kind of how lien positions from financiers work overseas. In the United States, there's the international registry. This is kind of what everybody needs to know, that Brazil has kind of taken up that, and then also made a lot of the repossession rights for financiers outside of the country the ability to basically, you call up as easy, they're trying to make it as easy it is with the FAA to repossess aircraft in Brazil, to really open up their capital markets, which is going to open up transactions into Brazil. I know Epic announced a big Brazilian sale last year of selling a lot of Epic E1000. GX is now the AX. Tron sees it as a large emerging market. Gulfstream sees it as a large emerging market. So it may not actually even be Embraer. That may not actually, in the Brazil question, it may not actually be Embraer with the risks that we're looking at. We may actually be looking at export risks. And all of a sudden, the book to build ratio kind of becomes weird because all your Brazilians are not going to take the 50% tariff because they haven't worked it out with President Trump. So I think that those are almost a higher risk than our Embraer aircraft that are technically assembled in Florida, made with Canadian, American, and Mexican parts, going to be subject to the tariff of a Brazilian company. I think it's more the other way around that creates a pretty big short-term and medium-term threat to American companies.
Yeah, it's going to get spicy and interesting again for the next few months while we figure this thing out. But I mean, hopefully it's like, the last few months, it's been these kind of big, bold statements, and then action happens relatively quickly. But I don't know, it keeps kind of popping its head up, so it's concerning.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. Hopefully this thing gets resolved, but we need some sort of surety in the market. I'm not sure how many more huge shocks the market can take.
Yeah. Well, I mean, hopefully with bonus depreciation in this, at least it'll even out, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. If I have to see another LinkedIn post about bonus depreciation, I'm like, every broker and dealer and everybody's like, bonus depreciation's back, buy the airplane. I'm like we get it. So, in other news, staying international here, kind of not a great topic, but something that we have to talk about. BizAv global accidents are trending up this year. In a report by AIN, who talked about the first half of 2025, BizJet accident fatalities soar in first half of 2025. 18 fatal turbine business aircraft accidents worldwide, claimed 81 passengers and crew members. The article goes into detail comparing the first half of 2025 to the first half of 2024 and talking about how the first half was up from 17 fatal accidents and 54 fatalities up to that 18 and 81 number. It then goes on to outline the U.S. registered aircraft. 9 people lost their lives. First 6 months, U.S. And registered business jets were actually the only segment that was fewer fatalities. So that's good news for the US. 9 people lost their lives in 3 U.S. registered business jet accidents last year versus 8 who died, almost 3 this year. So we're down a little bit this year. Jesse, you are the safety gal. Let's talk through the difference. I want to hear your opinion on U.S. versus non-U.S. and then 91 versus 135.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways to slice the data. Private Aviation Safety Alliance, we really focus on aggregated 135 because 135 is passenger carrying operations. If you looked at just 135, the numbers are worse. I mean, like, we're trending on a worse path for the U.S. than we were last year. And that's because there were some pretty bad ones. Like in Alaska, it was a caravan crash. There were a lot of passengers' lives lost, but again, not in the business jet area. So if you just want to look at business jets, I think it's about par for the course last year. But if we look at 135 overall, it's not going well. And I think it's just reflective of all the hiring woes that everyone's experienced the last few years. You've got new people in aircraft. They haven't flown as often, but I don't think we're on a good trend. What you want to see the trends coming down, right? We have better technology, better aircraft, supposedly better training, and accidents shouldn't be going up, and they shouldn't be really staying status quo. They should be decreasing. So I find it concerning that it's not. And certainly too, I think the news coverage this year has been really tough for business aviation. We keep seeing these very high profile accidents in the news. Even this weekend, there was a crash in London, and the video from that is just devastating. I mean, it's a fireball on the runway, closed down the airport. It's not a good look for the industry. I think we need to kind of get back to some of the basics here and start focusing on safety and safety culture specifically, because I don't like the trend that we're heading in. Look, it's still a very, very safe way to travel, but our goal is 0. We don't have any fatalities out there.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think it's important to kind of double click here and at the micro segments of the industry and who is most susceptible to these types of accidents. One of the number one thing I get asked by end consumers who read my newsletter is safety, 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 Argus, all of the kind of stuff about safety. And I think it's important to double click in here on this year. One accident on February 10th was a Learjet 35A that veered off the runway while landing in Scottsdale, killing the pilot. It's the only fatality. It's unfortunate. It's very sad. It did kill the pilot, but it was a Learjet 35A. Technology is not there. It is a lot of aircraft for one pilot to handle. So double click there. March 13th, a Cessna Citation CJ2 on a planned ferry flight made a right turn and climbed about 950 feet after takeoff before it began a rapid descent into the ground. Ferry flight, I'm not going to make assumptions because I don't know the finer details, but ferry flights, typically there is some sort of maintenance event that has either previously happened or is about to happen. So you have to think that potentially that was the cause. Sole pilot on board died. May 22nd, a Citation S550 was destroyed when it crashed on approach near San Diego. The pilot and 5 passengers were killed. All 3 accidents occurred under Part 91. So all 3 accidents in the United States thus far this year that have fatalities were flown Part 91. And note, they were all flown, unless there is a misrepresentation in this article, single pilot. So when you're comparing single pilot old aircraft Part 91 operations versus dual crewed Part 135 US based trips, the safety statistics are incredibly different. And so if you're going to take an aggregate number, it's unfair to those groups that fly 2-pilot 135, professionally flown, have excellent training, excellent safety management systems, and saying, well, look at all these accidents that have happened this year. I think that that's a really unfair comparison if you're going to look at it in the aggregate.
Yeah, agreed, Matt. And then again, that gets back to the culture and what kind of operation it is. And that's just stuff. We have third-party audits, which unfortunately are paid for. So there is an issue there with, who's getting paid for what service to certify you. It's what we have. We don't really have any other way to kind of figure out who's a good operator and who's a bad operator. That's something we're trying to do at PASA is, aggregating the safety data and the incidents that are occurring before there's an accident so you can vet that operator. But it's tough. I think a lot of times it's people rely on word of mouth, knowing the culture of the company, and do they push the boundaries? Do they have, newer technology in the aircraft? Do they have, the flight risk assessments before every trip? That's just stuff that's hard for the average consumer to know. Yes, but I agree with some parts of this. I want to see the numbers go down, even if, there's no passengers on board, because it still represents issues. If things are increasing in general and one end of the spectrum, they could start to increase in others. But totally agree with you. Single pilot operations, older aircraft that don't have the same kind of technology on board. Some can be upgraded, so older airplanes that have the upgrades, that can be different. But there's so many nuances to this, and feel bad for the families and everyone who's having to deal with the situation. But it's also not going to be good for operators, because your insurance rates, regardless of its, industrial, Medevac, whoever it is, you're all in the same bucket, and you're going to get judged accordingly, and you're going to pay the premiums accordingly as well. So more costs are going up. We need to get everybody going in the right direction.
Yep, no, totally agree. Well, moving on to our next story, because I know we want to be conscious of the commute. PHI has withdrawn from their IPO, and there's a little bit of M&A activity. Jesse, this is your world in helicopter IPO, so would love to get your take on this story.
Yeah, I'm really curious, because it's like there's some like glints of good things happening, and then there's other areas where I'm still confused on. So it looks like Gamma Aviation, they sold Jet East last year for 113 million. So they've got some cash in their pocket. They're doing lots of operator acquisitions, and specifically in like the Medevac space, which I find interesting because I came from some of that world, not pure Medevac blade, but we did the organ transport. But you look back at in 2017, both Air Methods and Global Medical Response, yes, some of the biggest medevac operations in the world, they were both acquired by PE, American Securities and KKR. They still hold those investments to this day. So when you talk about those very large companies trying to go public, the PHI is trying to go public, it just seems like they can't get there. And the business is growing. I think there's some issues with the margins potentially, but it looks like Gamma's maybe investing in this for the long-term perspective, because they see it's a growing market. Medevac is expanding all the time. The margins, we don't know all the time how they're going to be. But, I can't believe that private equity has held some of these investments for, we're almost at a decade now. That's well beyond their investment horizon.
Yeah, I think we've talked a lot about in this program, not investment advice, past performance is not indicative of future performance, yada, yada. But I think that we've talked about this, that public markets have a very hard time with private aviation. For instance, this is just like one example, and this is even private markets. So helicopters specifically, if you don't understand the time life components versus the hour-long components, even if you're a fixed wing person, you don't exactly understand how that works. And you also probably don't understand how integrated the OEMs are in the maintenance cycles and in their programs. It's far more interrelated in helicopters than it is even in fixed wing. There's not even really, you could argue Safran, but like they're an engine manufacturer. There's not a JSSI equivalent inside of helicopters. Like you can't privatize programs even inside of helicopters because they're so complicated. And the appraisals, for instance, there's like 3 people that do really good helicopter appraisals, and the rest of them tend to have no idea. And so there's a lot of nuances that come specifically with helicopters. Helicopters are used a lot in the medevac space. There's also a need in private equity there has to be time for a platform company and then all the bolt-ons that come around it. And in a world of private aviation, the integration periods are just so much longer. You look at the Wheels Up and AirShare transaction just as an example. The amount of time that it took for all of the operations to transfer from Wheels Up over to AirShare, kind of like officially, right? All of the stuff. Or, every time we see a 135 certificate for sale, it's kind of the indication of the transition is finally over. Like that takes time. Like the integration cycles, I think, take a lot longer. And then you go, okay, now how do we optimize and how do we see synergies? So I think that they're having to take a longer time horizon. Gamma Aviation bought Capital Air Ambulance in the UK. Like it's not, they've kind of bought the platform company. Now they're bolting everybody on, but it's just a different sector, and markets don't really get it.
Yeah, I find the interesting thing too with PHI. I mean, they're Medevac, but they do a lot of oil and gas. And given how much oil and gas activity is going to increase in the United States, maybe this is a play to stay private, or to look for private buyers separately because they know that the space is getting ready to ramp up a bit. Maybe that's kind of why they're pulling this. Although to announce it, I mean, I think they announced it a year and a half ago, so to not get there in that time. But again, markets have been depressed. It's been uncertainty with elections. Who knows where this is going to go? I do see the medevac space, though. I mean, at some point, these companies have got to start ramping back up. I mean, that is a solid business. I think it can be very competitive, and hospitals should take safety a little more seriously than they do sometimes. Sometimes they just go with the biggest and not necessarily with those who have the best records, which you can see at PASA as well. So you should check that out. But it's a complicated space. On top of transitioning just a regular private jet operation, now you're doing operations 24/7. You have patient lines involved. You have medical employees that you didn't have. That horizon is a lot longer than just your standard aircraft operation.
Yeah, it's medevac is hard, and you've been there. Well, you've been in the organ transplant space. It's different. I've got a couple of clients that are in the medevac space, and it's just things just move slowly in that world too. So I think that it's important to understand that. Let's wrap it up with the last story today. We have got some new data from JetNet that we have gotten some access to. So we are going to talk through the book to build ratio. And what that means for kind of the health of the market right now. You have tariffs, you have uncertainty, you have certifications being pushed back, all of this stuff that you would think would probably create a lot of turbulence and stuff, but it's not necessarily.
All right. Well, yeah. So our new friends at JetNet, who have graciously agreed to give us some of their data to share with you, our wonderful audience. This was interesting. So this was one of the pieces of information they sent over to us last week. It's the book to bill ratios on the top manufacturers in our space. Essentially, for those who don't understand, which to be totally fair, I don't totally fully understand aircraft manufacturing, but book to bill is basically how much is being billed versus how much people want to buy. Anything above a 1 is considered good. Anything below a 1 is, well, you're maybe behind the curve a little bit. But I find this chart so interesting just in the fact that look at Embraer and the volatility of this company. I mean, we knew that there were supply chain issues, but I think this really outlines, there's a big mismatch between demand and supply for some, but then others, like the Gulf streams out there, they kind of hover just pretty consistently year to year for a long time.
Yeah, I think it's the big swings that I would say are probably the hardest to fully grasp. There's so much information that that pushes these numbers to be above and below the book to bill. I think it's also telling about lead times and are people getting impatient? Are there secondary sales of brand new delivered aircraft? You look back to so looking back on this chart, you can see in the beginning is 2009, right? So we all know what happened post 2008. What is lovely known as the white tails, right? You would basically speculate on an order in the future, which says that I'm going to place an order today, and then I believe in the future I'm going to be able to sell it at a premium. If you're an executive at one of these large manufacturers, I hate to tell you, but it still happens. I've seen it happen a couple of times in the last 2 months. But the fact is that this is a big KPI for these manufacturers to actually say, okay, our clients are placing the order and then we are delivering and then we are replacing that delivery order with another order for the future, right? So it's like predictable cash flows, predictable business. Like that's really what we're looking for, right? And so you look at Bombardier, for instance, in the black line, and it's also incredibly volatile. If you remember back kind of to these time periods, you had a lot of uncertainty around the Bombardier viability as a business. Canada had lockdowns a lot more severe than the US did, right? And so, the booking is say, I'm going to sign a contract today for something in the future. And then billing is I'm collecting money to be able to fulfill these orders. And the ratio is a little bit, it's not like, oh, here's a book to delivery, but the book to bill, right? It's a cash flow metric. And so Embraer being incredibly volatile, I think it may actually be also skewed by, because it's a ratio. So large bookings versus not delivering, right? So can pull back a little bit of that ratio because, remember back to what happened in 2024, book to bill, right? FlexJet puts in a giant order in 2024. And so you kind of have all these levers that you're kind of pulling on. I think that it's going to be telling what happens. What's really going to be interesting is to look at this in this time next year, because we're then going to see a lot of the ripple throughs in a bigger picture of the tariffs and kind of the health of what these different OEMs are having.
Yeah, but I mean, for one thing is for sure that I see in this chart that's relevant today. I mean, we're softening. We've got definitely some softening in the new aircraft sales. I think we're seeing the same thing in the used market. We've all been wondering, is it politics? Is it a timing thing? Or is it that the market is actually softening? But I think only time would tell. I think if nothing else, we've definitely gotten over our COVID highs. And that was a crazy market. I mean, you can see that peak right there in 2021. I mean, that was the insane. Everyone wants to fly private. The market is booming and going nuts. We're not there anymore, which is good. That's not sustainable. If we kept doing that, everyone would burn out and we just wouldn't do well. So it's a return to normalcy, if nothing else. But it looks like most are hovering, still in the one plus, and Embraer is definitely, even though there's that volatility in those spikes, like they're leading the whole pack on book to bill ratios today. So they're holding their prices firm too.
Yep, they are. I mean, NetJets just started taking delivery of their Praetor 500, so those bill ratios get to go up, right? And so, leading the pack, the Phenom 300 is the most popular light business jet. I think it's the most popular business jet, period, for a couple of years running. We'll see what happens this year, but I don't see it slowing down based on everybody I talked to. So that wraps up the VIP seat this week. Jesse, if we want to connect with you, where should we go? Where should we find all your stuff? Here's your 30-second plug for whatever you've got working.
Thank you. Well, if you're not following my LinkedIn, you definitely should, because not only do I post the fun content, I'm also constantly in that comment section. So make sure you're following me so you get those updates. But for anyone who's looking for the safety stuff that I do, flyingprivate.org. Most of our dashboards are free. You can go and look on any operator and see what their enforcement records are. It's accidents, incidents, all that stuff for free at flyingprivate.org. Thanks for the plug, Preston.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to find me, I'm on Twitter at PrestonHolland6, also on LinkedIn. Just posted a new article, The Not So Private Jet. So go give that a read. It's basically a deep dive of the history of jet tracking and Jack Sweeney. My day job, Prestige Aircraft Finance. You can find that at prestigefinance.com. Drop me a note on LinkedIn, Twitter, Pigeon, however you want to get in contact with me. I'll probably reply. And other than that, I'm sure I'll see some of you guys at the next big business aviation event. I'm going to Oshkosh. I know Jesse doesn't, but I'm going to Oshkosh. So if you're going to be there, let me know. And we will see you next week. Like, subscribe, hit the bell, share it with your friends, all the good plug stuff. We will see you next week.